there. Good afternoon. Welcome back to November, the Power of No. And if you watched yesterday's fiasco on the ride, we're back stable today because there was no way I was repeating that again. That was pretty frightening. In fact, I haven't even watched it myself because, yeah, it just seemed awful to me just from the filming of it. Um, so, anyway, we're back stable and talking for a second day about fear. And how do we say no to fear? So, we talked about yesterday about the need to, when we're afraid of something, to think about how we're focusing and what our perspective is on that fear. One of the main things we talked about doing is to acknowledge the fear. Acknowledge the fear, write it down, bring it out of the shadows and out of your brain. So either speak it out loud or write it down, and it can help you to think about why is it that I'm afraid of this thing and to analyze it a little more. For me, one of the things I have always feared is going to networking events. I hate going someplace. I don't know about you. I hate going into a new situation where I don't know anybody and I'm supposed to walk in and be personable and speak to them and make conversation. Hate that kind of thing. I have a lot of thoughts in those situations. I start thinking about, what if no one wants to talk to me, and what are they thinking of me? Now, it does help to have some positive steps to think about, and I will tell you one of mine for that. I read this in a book once. It was a fiction book, but this woman had 12 or 14 rules of life. And one of her rules, it's the only one I remember, was this: no one's thinking about you. They're busy thinking about themselves, just like you. And that kind of helps me because I think these people are busy thinking about themselves. So if I focus on them, it might be a better experience. So when you're afraid of something, though, it helps to acknowledge what you're afraid of and to really think through exactly what is it that I am afraid of. The next thing you can do is share your feelings with another person. Ask someone to help you evaluate honestly the process we talked about yesterday. That process was to think about what is the very worst that could happen. And then once you've thought of it, what is the likelihood of that happening? And if it did, how bad is that really? And if it did, the next question is, what would you do? Think about what is it I would do in that situation if it actually happened. And it can help then to put some steps and to think through those steps with someone else. Because if I was thinking about that networking situation, for instance, I might say, well, the very worst thing that could happen is I either say something really stupid and people go like, ugh, or that nobody speaks to me and I'm just left standing by myself with nobody to talk to and people keep walking away from me or whatever. And what, if that were to happen, that's pretty awful. What would I do? I could think through with someone some steps that I could take if that happened to me. That I could, steps like looking for somebody else who's standing all alone. Look for somebody else who looks very uncomfortable being there. Honestly, another step is I could leave. That's a choice I can make, right? We aren't necessarily having to subject ourselves to something that's really uncomfortable, but it can help to talk it through with somebody who might be able to give us better ideas than like I just would leave. They might be able to help with that. The next thing we talked about is that you can reframe your fears in a positive way. Now, one of the things I do, and it came from a lesson I received at a networking group, but somebody was speaking, and she had us fill out cards that she then sent to us, and so I have mine. And one of my positive thoughts about things like that was to expect positive interactions when I go to networking groups, because sometimes we get what we expect. So if I go into it saying, it is very likely, most likely that I'll have positive interactions, we can deal with that. I talked about wonderment, wondering how this could turn into something positive. If I go in with that attitude and reframe my fear that way, it might lead to a much better experience. The next thing is to set goals in the area where you have your fears. So I decide before I go to an event that I have to go in and try to network or get along with people I don't know and make friends with people I don't know. I try to set a very small but manageable, and they always tell you have goals that are SMART, something that you can measure. I'll set a number. I want to have a positive interaction with 2 to 3 people. I want to have a good conversation with 2 to 3 people. I also come up with a list of good questions that I can ask. You can Google that. There are all sorts of great ideas out there of questions you can ask somebody in networking besides, what do you do? Now, I've found, and probably you have too, people love to talk about themselves. And so if you get them going on a good question, it's great. Now, I'll be honest, they don't all often reciprocate, right? So they get talking about themselves, and you could leave there not having gotten a chance to even explain to them who you are or what you like or what vacation, because that's something you could ask people, or what did you do for your Thanksgiving vacation, or Thanksgiving holiday. You may never even get to share yours, but you know what? They're going to have a positive opinion of you because you listened to them. And they may not even be able to identify that that's why, but they will have a positive opinion of you. Eleanor Roosevelt once suggested that you do one thing every day that scares you. And so that's one of the things we can do to help conquer our fears. Now, probably you've all heard about the exposure therapy thing where somebody's terribly afraid of spiders or snakes. And so they start to give them, first they make them look really quickly at a picture of the snake, and each time it gets a little longer, and they work their way up until they can actually be in the presence of a controlled presence of one that's being held by somebody that's alive. And they work your way up till that you begin to lose your fear. Well, we can do the same thing. We can do this by, kind of giving ourselves time to attempt something that we fear, or being exposed to something that we fear multiple times so that it begins to lessen the fear. I'll tell you what, these Facebook Lives are part of that. I was terrified of using Facebook Live. Obviously, based on yesterday's failure and fiasco, I'm still not great at it. But I have much less fear about doing it. And the fact that I came back on today, like after yesterday, is a great positive step for me. I started to move toward conquering that fear by doing it multiple times. So think about how you can give yourself little miniature exposures to what it is you fear so that you can realize that it's not so fearful. So then after any kind of a fearful situation, it can be helpful to evaluate it again. How did it go? Was it better than expected? Was it worse than expected? If it was better than expected, tell yourself to remind yourself always that what you feared didn't come about. So you hopefully will fear it less. And if it was horrible, meet with your buddy and talk with them about what strategies you could have employed to move beyond that and get better steps for the next day. The next thing I would say is celebrate your successes a lot. If people come on and people seem to appreciate what you're doing, or people see, like Cindy just made a little comment, doing well on Facebook Live. Thank you, Cindy. Like when that happens, celebrate the positive things. When something good happens in the area that you're afraid of, just celebrate it, because we all need to celebrate more. One of the things I love about the networking group I attend is they take time every meeting to celebrate anything you want to celebrate. And I think that's wonderful. Now, I want you to remember, if you did happen to listen to yesterday's, the story about the giant insect that attacked me. And if you remember, it got behind my glasses and I was freaking out because it was totally obscuring my vision, and I ripped off my glasses and it was a gnat. That's the way it is with things that we fear. The more we focus on the fear, the more we do that, it shifts our perspective and totally disorients our perspective and distorts it in a way that makes it much bigger than it is. So let's learn to conquer our fears and say no to them. Maybe it's just baby steps we're taking toward conquering it, but let's do it and have a much better new year as we go into 2022. Hey, it's been great talking with you. See you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Take care. Bye.